We're talking about playbooks, and maybe just you have questions on how to execute some of the things that we spoke about over the last 2 weeks. Maybe you want to share some of the problem spaces you're trying to solve, see if anybody else is solving the same thing. I just wanted these last 3 staffies to be extremely practical. I want to make sure we have actual tools to help us lead and to help us write things that are going to basically move us in the right direction. So over to all of you, I don't know if what your questions are, but answer them. And as always, you can point them to someone in particular in the team. Maybe you feel like they're in a similar space to you and you would just be interested to find out how they did something. Utilize the room, and just before you ask your question, who you're actually asking it to, and then your question. Awesome, let's go.
At the end of, I think it was the first week that we were talking about this, Pastor Chris, this is for you, or Pastor Odds, either one of you. But you posed a question of...
Sorry, I'm going to pause you 1 second. Carla's in the waiting room.
One question that you posed was, is the potential I'm seeing ready to grow? And I would love a little bit more insight on that. So obviously with a team like Creative, it's pretty large and it's hard to, you can't like turn the ship all the time with different like leadership moves or different decisions and some of that. What are some characteristics that you look for in people, knowing that they're actually ready to grow and ready to move versus seeing that potential being a little bit down the line? Because you obviously don't want to wait too long on that, but sometimes I think I've been too eager, too quick to give like responsibility of places that don't end up fully working.
Okay, and when you say they don't fully work, how does that transpire?
I think I've been excited about potential. I've seen where somebody can be. I'm very futuristic, I'm very vision forward, so I can see what someone is going to be. I can see kind of what they can bring or what growth will bring. I think I get excited about that and have put more on them maybe than they've been ready to handle at given moments. But yeah. I feel like I've learned a lot by getting a lot handed to me. So I think, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. I think there's a few things. There's many ways you could play that, and I'm sure many people in the room have different things that have worked for them. I would say that one of the big things is, first of all, have you been able to test them with anything? Like, have you given them something incrementally so that they can actually show themselves to be good at something, faithful with something? Incremental kind of testing is really, really important. Second thing is, as the leader, can you give a better picture of what they're going to be showing up to mitigate that aspect of, man, they weren't ready for it? Like, do you know what they're doing? I think the hardest places to lead anyone is when you don't know the work like that they're doing, and it ends up being something that isn't something you can't solve from the simple aspects of leadership, which is goal-oriented, feedback culture, assessing, prioritizing, iterating. All those things eventually will get you there. But I guess for now that you've learnt the work, you could better kind of have an assessment of whether they're ready based on the time commitment. So I think giving people an opportunity to win by assessing what they actually have to give. And third is calling them with vision, but then giving them a practical, this is what it's going to look like, and letting them walk away and make a decision as to, can they do it? And then last, don't be so afraid to shift people out of something that you become slow to bring them into something. I think if we are too slow, if we're afraid to let people know, hey, this isn't working out, let's look for somewhere else for you to go, then we'll never bring them in. And eventually that hurts us. Which then means the way you bring them in, don't bring people into promotions, bring them into opportunities. I think we often make it feel like a promotion, and now any move feels like a demotion, and that becomes challenging. So I think including people in a work, create a culture in your team that is, hey, we're going to figure this out for a minute. It may not be your forever role, but it is your right now role. Let's see if it works. We'll reevaluate in 3 months, or we'll reevaluate in a month. And if it doesn't work, man, let's find somewhere else that fits. The goal is 2 things: team above everything. What's the need for the team? And 2, how do you fill a spot that works? So I would run it that way, because you don't want to paint yourself into a corner as you bring people on board.
Thank you.
I would also just think about, is it them or is it just your leadership? Because I think if we position people and we do everything Chris said, I think sometimes as leaders, we just don't want to have tough conversations and we don't want to be honest with the people we're leading. And I think we just let things slide. And before you know it, it's like you got to demote them because they're not showing up prepared, or they're irresponsible, or they're just not making time for it, or their heart's not in it. But I wonder how much of that is just a leadership thing and not holding lines and being clear on holding people accountable to the thing that they wanted when they first took on the role.
That's really good. And actually that made me think of, I would ask the question in two different categories, and I would make those categories competency and character. And what I mean by that, character, if we want to talk about like leadership muscle, and skill set. Let's talk about it that way. I think those two things don't make you completely good at the other. You can be really skilled in something and lack leadership, and that is a good scenario to be in because you're only developing one of those, right? So you're helping them now develop their leadership muscle. You could be really good with leadership muscle and don't have skill set. So they maybe are great at running teams and stuff, but they need a specific skill set for what you do, right? And then there's a scenario where they don't have either of those. That person's going to be hard to promote. Why? Because you're setting them up to fail. They can't carry it through skill, and they definitely can't carry it through leadership. There's so much for them to learn, that's going to be really difficult. The second thing is, if you're going to get them to step up, you've got to find out, all right, is this a step up in their leadership or a step up in their skill? And you've got to be able to define that. And then you've got to ask yourself the relationship that those two things have with each other. So let's say you're calling them to step up, and this is going to be a massive skill step up. All right, is their leadership at a place that can cover the gap while they learn the skill? And if it's an opposite, this is going to be a massive skill set ask, or a massive leadership ask. Okay, can their skill set carry a little bit of that while their leadership catches up? And you've got to make decisions according to that, so that basically you know what you're developing in the person and you're not under any false pretense. I've watched a lot in church, both from a leader perspective and, if you want to call it, a meaningful contributor perspective. People confuse leadership and skill set and think that they're interchangeable, and they're not. Leadership is how you communicate. Leadership is how you control emotion. Leadership is how you respond versus react. Leadership is how you handle challenges. Leadership is how you create a buffer between what you would want to feel like if you're just a person at the seat at the table and how you have to feel and interact when you're at the head of the table. At the head of the table, I've got to be a buffer between what my team might be feeling and what I've got to guard that. So I might want to be negative. I can't be because I'm a buffer for the team, you know? So that's kind of more like that leadership side, and skill set is knowledge base, experience in a particular field or in a whatever it might be. So you've got people like Erica in Love Is, and she's studied micro enterprise. Cool, she's high on that skill set. But Shannon has to then help her develop what's next for her. Is it a skill set thing or a leadership thing? If you can make those two distinctions, it'll help you better make decisions as to what they're ready for and how to release them and how to develop them and which side of them you're developing. So not every step up is a new role. Sometimes it's a new aspect of them stepping up.
So I've got a question. So how do you navigate people where in one season they felt called to ministry in the four walls, but their words and their actions don't align with that? Mm-hmm. And you've said the thing, you've given them, you've discipled them, you've given guidance, you've suggested things. It's along the lines of like, you haven't done the last thing that I've said, but you say you want this. At what point as a leader, is there a point as a leader where you're hands off with that, where it's like, don't come back to me until you've done the last thing that we've talked about? Or do you keep, I don't want to phrase it like this, but it's like beating something that's already dead. Like you keep going after that same thing, even though the person's actions aren't aligning with the words that they're saying. Like, does that make sense, the question?
It does. I think, as I hear your question, something that we could all, and this is, by the way, all of us, I think, in our church right now, with where we're heading next year, the muscle that's going to be tested most is not skill set, it's going to be leadership. A lot of the formulas and systems are in place. They're not perfect. They've got to be iterated. But where we're at now is, how do I develop the person? How do I develop calling in the person? How do I help them upskill, manage aspects of themselves, of their brokenness, of their healing, of the way they interact with other people? That is going to be the thing. So on that, I just say that just to phrase it, because I don't think I did yet. But to Gio's point, what I hear is that part of our role as a leader is to walk people to destinations. And one of those places you have to walk people through is actually self-discovery and the discovery of what they think they've heard God on sometimes, right? So if someone feels like, many a time people will be like, I want ministry. Okay, cool. I'm gonna walk you through that. And the part of us walking is to qualify and quantify whether you even know what ministry is, whether you can really understand what the cost is, is it something that you feel called or you feel inspired to do? And then lastly, do we know your roadblocks? The portion of being a leader, I think of it very much like going to a mechanic. When I go to a mechanic, I don't want him to lead me completely to the discovery of the problem. I don't want him to be like, hey, have you, so what could it be? Are you hearing a sound when you turn the key? All right, what does that sound like? Well, you know what I mean? In an essence, like, you're there to help them see things they can't see. And if we make that part of our role as a leader, it causes the questions we ask and the places we lead them to be a little more intentional. So quite often, if you get frustrated, right, where I'm going with this is, if they can't give you answers and that points us to a place of frustration, it almost makes our job to an extent redundant. What we're trying to do is help them answer questions they're not even aware they're trying to ask. So it's like, okay, what I mean by that is, it's our job sometimes to help them find the roadblock. Where do you think you're stuck? Let's talk about this. We're going through the same thing, and it's knowing the difference between, are they stubborn, are they lazy, or are they lost? You know, if they're stubborn, okay, that's nothing we can do with that. Only time and God. God will do something with that. And time usually will do something with that. If they're lazy, all right, well, you're not doing the work. But if they're lost, that's where we've got to help them. You know, and Jake and I were talking, he reminded me of something that I told him like a while ago. As shepherds, right, there's this debate quite often that people are like, oh, well, is it leadership or is it discipleship? Like, aren't we meant to feed the sheep? And the truth is, if you've ever been on a pasture, you actually feed sheep by leading them to new places. Yeah. Like, they have to go to where the pasture is, right? Like, so I think that your journey has to dive deep and ask the questions that are blocking them. And honestly, that's not an easy process. It's uncomfortable. It gets heated. It gets emotional. Not because of anything other that you're digging beyond surface, and that's very personal. And it means really, and that means on both sides, both parties have to be very well invested on the outcome and feel like, okay, you've got my best interest at hand. And I would encourage you in those moments, if we only lead people according to what they know, then it's going to be very limited. Our goal is to draw things out of them. So I would have meetings like, hey, I believe you want ministry. I genuinely believe I believe you want ministry. I know you've iterated to me that you've heard God on it. I'm stuck right now that I'm not seeing some changes. What I want your help with is, how do we get to the bottom of what that's not happening? I don't know if that's a me thing. I don't know if that's a circumstantial thing, a you thing. Is it a faith thing? My reason for meeting you today, and from now on, moving forward, our meetings will be about solving this one issue. Because I know you've got the capacity. I know you've got the potential. You've got the skill, but something isn't working. Let's dive into that together. Why do you think it is that we're back at the same thing? By then digging together, and if the next answer for anyone on the screen would be, well, I've done that, it's not a checklist, it's a milestone. I think in leadership, you have to know the difference between checklist and milestone. Checklist is something you do and that's it. Milestone is something you have to reach. This is a milestone moment. You got to reach the root of this, and that's not a checklist situation. You can say it 1,000,000 times and it still doesn't mean you've solved it.
That's good.
I have a question. This is really for anybody in the room, but what are some ways that you can kind of test and let me rephrase it. What are some ways to help restore someone who was maybe a leader in their church or a leader in their family or in ministry in some capacity that maybe walked away from those things, walked away from faith, walked away from church, walked away from ministry, and then they returned? Like, how do you assess their readiness to be restored back to, like, how healthy they are and to be restored back to whatever it is that they were previously in?
Great question, Shayla. Can I pick on someone to say something for you, Shayla? Others will probably have answers too. But I'm going to pick on Win-Win. And the reason Win-Win is, I know there is no wrong answer in this, but I do think that you've got good wisdom and you're observant. We've watched you on the Renée team, and I would love any contribution that you would have on that. How would you play that out? I put you on the spot, I know.
You did. Wow. I'm still, sorry, my mind was in the last question and I was trying to internalize it. But if I get it correctly, your question is about like like the differentiation of someone's coming back to almost like we're approaching this first love situation. Am I correct?
Yeah, like if they're they're coming back, kind of like the prodigal son, like they're coming back to faith, or coming back to ministry or leadership in some capacity. Like, how do you help to restore them to that, and how do you assess just readiness overall?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. That's deep. Maybe not so much in the ministry perspective because I'm new, but I think sometimes like one of my strengths in Cliff's Strength Finders is learner, and I like to position myself always like a new perspective, even though I have past experiences. And recently I've watched some podcasts on some pastors, and they talk about your identity is not your past experiences. Even though we just talked about how past experiences bring you knowledge, but sometimes, like especially when this is, if specifically on God's assignment, sometimes God do want to challenge you or not of your past experiences. And so I think it's important to not neglect the fact that they've been hurt. So definitely like understand where they're coming from, understand where their current state is, but also encourage them that, hey, this is not what you see in the past. And we actually are talking about a lot of redeeming stories that might come into our team. So it's important to recognize the pain and recognize where they're at, but also it's important to recognize that our God is way bigger than your past experiences. So incorporate that learner mindset again. It's not like shutting it off like, oh, it's been done. It will always be like this. So I think it goes hand in hand. It's not mutually exclusive. Like I'm overly optimistic and also I'm not overly pessimistic in that sense. Hopefully that's good enough.
I love it. No, well, I like what Win-Win said actually. If I could just say something off the back of what he said, and then a few more comments would be great on this. I think this is actually a really good subject. There's a lot of people at this table that have had to walk that out. But what I like about what Win-Win said is I think learning is so key, because if you have a previous wound, but then that wound is sealed by this like callus of, I know everything there is to know about this, it creates a cycle of then this will never change, this won't be better. So the fact of learning new things, learning the person that they are, and almost relearning some things, not negating though that they've been through something, I think is a very powerful combination. I appreciate that. That was really well spoken to, especially being on the spot. Hats off to you. Well done. Anyone else comment on that? I mean, I know there are a few people here that have actually walked that out. maybe you could speak from what was actually helpful for you when you walked back into ministry and church off the back of running from it.
Why are you looking at me?
Well, you're one of them. You're definitely a prime candidate.
Marlene texts me, she's like, that's Carmona's cue to speak.
I love that Marlene texts you. You didn't even pick up on it. You're like, I'm just confirming what Marlene is telling me
I
here.
look like Carmona Q. Carmona Q.
We're still working on that.
Okay, I think I have something to say. Yeah, so as a person, like, you know, I wasn't one of the people that like really like grew up going to church as much as other people that I've met at PC, but I think something that I've learned recently is like, you know, stepping in to do different, services, like in the church, within the church, has helped me a lot, like learn kind of like about things that I've gone through. Like each department in the church has taught me something of my past or something that I am currently going through. And it's been really helpful because it's helped me grow and it's helped me acknowledge things like my strengths that I didn't know before, or even when I did know that they were my strengths and I didn't know what to call them. And like, I'll see myself like using them and I'll be watching out for my blind spots as I'm going. And so it's been really nice because I know I got to experience that when I was, you know, in kids, and I got to experience that even when I was in hospitality and in next steps. And so I think if somebody, you know, had gone through something and then they're stepping back into church and they're kind of like trying to learn or grow through whatever it is that they went through, and they're trying to like get their faith back or whatever it is, I think that just kind of like encouraging them to step into different areas of the church can help them grow. Because honestly, like even then you get to meet people within those services, and like they teach you things, and it's a chain effect. So whatever it is that you're bringing, like they're bringing to the table, and it's like you're all learning, growing with each other. And honestly, it does help build your faith a little bit stronger when you're doing it together with other people, because realistically, like we all have something going on, you know, behind closed doors, and it just makes it easier when you know that you do have something like that to fall back on.
It's really good, Nadia. Thank you for sharing that. It's so awesome to watch that answer, and also knowing your journey and the way you've been growing is really, really awesome. I love that you shared there. And just to say something to what Nadia said, I think one of the great things is our temptation is put them back what they were in before. One of the best things you could do is put them somewhere new. It helps with not activating a previous wound while building trust in a new environment. So what they get to do is get a new concept of ministry. They usually get to pick up on the culture of the church while not in a place that directly reminds them of their wound is a really cool thing about what Nadia just said. One thing I would say is whenever somebody leaves People Church, we have a phrase, and this is one thing that maybe you haven't heard at your level, but I'd love you to hear because I want it to continue. And it is this: let them leave with dignity. There's an element of, you know, there's a balance point between going, hey, I know you're moving on. I don't feel that from God. What you're saying doesn't line up with good reasons, but I just want you to know we love you and there's always room for you. And that's it. When we've done that, we've had a high rate of people coming back. Secondly is, to a certain extent, you would have seen this a few, 2 years ago, is that we will not comment on someone that is leaving no matter what they say. Because what I want to always create is an opportunity for people to come back. And if you let them leave with dignity, it's that much harder, it's that much easier for them to walk back. And I think the prodigal son, his father let him leave with dignity. He didn't condemn him for leaving. He didn't point out how, socially it was weakening the family and an act of dishonor by taking his, inheritance early. He just actually let him leave. And I think that made the journey back that much easier. And so letting people leave with dignity and then welcoming them back with dignity. Being more excited that they're back than needing to address the reason they left is also another key thing that is really, really crucial when creating a good place for people to take. Now, the conversation at one point will need to take back, happen. But I think they're aware of that, ready for it, wanting it. But it's, I think, what you do last and what you do first, which will often determine the success of that season for people. We got like 10 minutes, guys, as we're rounding this up. Any other questions around Playbook and how you're writing it? Any of you stuck somewhere? And remember, you can write this for yourself. You can write it for your team, for your department.
I think the one place that I'm like getting stuck at, but honestly, Pastor, you spoke to it, is the vision. Like, which part of the vision do you tackle? Because that's the one thing that I'm like, man, there's so much to this vision. It's all beautiful and wonderful, but I'm like, okay, what do I narrow down on? And how do I do that well? And even who do I need in the room to be able to do that well? It's something that I've just been sitting with. And so I'm excited to hear whatever that structure is going to be come the new year. I think that's going to be really helpful, at least for me in particular.
That's really good. I love what you said from an organizational systems and structures perspective. Structure is so imperative. Think like, you know, structures and systems, they go hand in hand, and you can't have an effective system if you don't have a well thought out structure. I would just say that with everything in church, you know, it's a good time to point this out. In church, you hear a lot about like, oh man, and there's just so much changing, there's so much changing. As from an organizational perspective, in a growing church, you reach the requirement for shift and change much quicker than other places. Because usually our biggest metric is people, right? Other people's metric is either money made or influence gained. And those, as you expand in that, doesn't always require a change internally. Whereas what we do is we're onboarding people to serve, we're serving more people. So the people dynamic, if you will, just because they're not hired doesn't mean they're not important or they're not meaningful contributors in what we do. So, I mean, this year alone, we started off at 200 odd serve team members, and we finished at...
We're around like 350 active.
So right now we have 350 people active. That's a change of like plus about 100 to 150 people. So that comes with huge challenges and changes. And so I say all that because if you're leading in this space as one that is experiencing it or one that is leading people, you've got to take into account that the structure you started with might be outgrown very quickly. And so the need to be very agile and to make systems and structures that fit your season rather than being someone that is rigid and says, but this is what we decided. It's got to be in accordance to what is in front of you. And so from a leadership perspective, I'm speaking purely. So just, I love what you said, Fallon. Structure will make it easier. And a great way to test if it's a good structure is do systems fit with it well. And, you know, I know that Ords has been talking to me about some of those things, so I'm excited for you to lead in that space and to keep moving that way. Somebody wrote a question thing to fix, but I don't know. I think it's a balance point. I think you can't have one without the other. If you're not critical, then there's no way to also be celebratory. I think the biggest tension point with everything is balance, knowing what you lean towards and trying to correct it, being aware that you don't want to overcorrect. I think the best way to do things is act, look for feedback, look for fruit, and iterate again. I think if we aim to get it right or aim to never get it wrong, it'll be a really hard place to be. So I would say the fact that you're even aware of it is brilliant, great leadership points right there. The fact that you're strategizing against it is fantastic. I would say keep it in mind, act on it, and see what kind of fruit it brings. If you find your team being uber critical, then maybe something's bled over. If they're being super celebratory but never looking at things they should fix, maybe they're out of touch. So I think fruit is always a great way for us to understand whether there's something to fix. And sometimes fruit isn't there yet because the roots are being established. But either way, assessing and looking at what you've done, then setting goals against it is a really good way to go. So I think you're on the right track. I mean, it's one of those unknown things because the work's got to be done in order for it to be corrected or have feedback on it, but I think you're on the right track, and I think it's a brilliant question.
I think practically speaking, the fact that you prioritize celebration is great, but I would introduce like quick fixes. So what are some of the things that we need to improve? What are some of the ideas? What are some of the solutions? How can we move forward? And I think you have like an equal balance of like all the things that are going well, but then you also want your team to see things as well. Like, what do you see? Tell me what you've experienced. How are you perceiving this? What was your experience like? And I think when you do that, they learn how to think and look for things as a leader. And so as leaders, you're shaping and molding a leadership mindset. And the more you can put back on them, the further your team is going to go in strength or in results or in numbers. So
good. So good. And also, can I just say, look at that two screen. Xavier and Shayla typed the exact same thing as to the response of how do you solve that, that's good team leadership and that's good team culture, that two people can speak on the exact same process. Fantastic. Guess that's how you win. Serve team of the year and one band, one sound. She's a preacher, even when she types. Hey guys, I'm really excited for you. I can't stress enough. I'd imagine a call this size, not everybody's going to be writing a playbook just because that would be incredible. It would be 100% success rate. But can I just say, if you find yourself anywhere next year and things aren't working for you, your team, your department, I would ask, did you follow the playbook? Have you updated the playbook? Did you even write the playbook? Has anybody even commented on the playbook? Go to the playbook because it is a standard to measure against. You don't know how far you've come. It's like when we get in the beach in Australia, you always look at where your towel is, and that's your measure whether you're drifting or not, because it happens quickly, and before you know it, you're somewhere that you don't want to be. So you always look back at the flags or you look back at your towel. And that's the point of the playbook. It's not that you're going to get it right. Don't be overwhelmed if you're a perfectionist and you don't want to write it because you don't want to get it wrong because you're inexperienced. The simple place of writing something gives you somewhere to start. And you'll either get better at writing it, you'll understand where you're at, where you're not yet. The power is having something to measure against. And that is a really important part of leadership. You got to aim, and that's part of this. Okay, so anyway, I'm excited, guys. It has been a fantastic, brilliant year. This is our last Staffy for the year. If we don't see you, we're going to see you Sunday. Can I encourage you, those seats will not fill themselves. Yep. And I know most of you are so responsible for executing the very thing that people are coming to, but let's not leave the bringing to everybody else. Let's invite people, let's save seats. It's going to be a fantastic Sunday. 3 services, 3 opportunities. And I can't wait to see how God moves and how people get saved. Anyway, guys, have the best rest of your day, best week. Let's write those playbooks and let's believe for God to do some extraordinary things next year.